up. 1, perfect. Hi, Mila. Good morning. Or I almost said good morning. Good afternoon. Okay. All right. So, like I said, hi, Saline. Oh my goodness, 4 of you guys. Wow, that's great. I wasn't expecting very many people today because it was kind of short notice. Oh, hi, Sky. Okay. So, chapter 16. What did we have here? Oh, that's okay, Mila. Not a problem, my dear. The videos are always there. Hi, Reed. The videos are always there so you can watch them at any time, right? It doesn't have to be when I'm doing the live ones. You can always go back and listen, right? It's up to you. I know that you guys are busy and you got other things going on, so that's totally okay if you're not watching all the time, right? I don't expect all of you guys to be watching all the time. And that's okay, right? You guys will still get the gist of the story. So chapter 16. Yeah. You went on Wednesday and Thursday. That's right. I was there. Yeah, I was at school this morning, and I'll be there tomorrow morning, all day Wednesday, and I'll be there Thursday, but I'm in a different class on Thursday. Yeah. So chapter 16, Ron, Harry, and Hermione used the invisibility cloak and went down to Hagrid's. Ron found Scabbers. Then they had to sneak out because Buckbeak was going to be executed, right? For you've got to watch everyone. Buckbeak was going to get executed, right? Because Hagrid lost that case against. I don't think he missed a lot, my dear. I think chapter 15, Gryffindor won the House Cup. And chapter 16, we had the Buckbeak stuff happen. Yeah. So let's get into chapter 17. Cat, Rat, and Dog. Harry's mind had gone blank with shock. The 3 of them stood transfixed with horror under the invisibility cloak. The very last rays of the setting sun were casting a bloody light over the long, shadowed grounds. Then, behind them, they heard a wild howling. Hagrid, Harry muttered. Without thinking about what he was doing, he made to turn back, but both Ron and Hermione seized his arms. We can't, said Ron, who was paper white. He'll be in worse trouble if they know we've been to see him. Hermione's breathing was shallow and uneven. How could they? She choked. How could they? Come on, said Ron, whose teeth seemed to be chattering. Yeah, and that's great, Mila. Yeah, so I think you've missed less than you think. They set off back towards the castle, walking slowly to keep themselves hidden under the cloak. Light was fading fast now. By the time they reached open ground, darkness was settling like a spell around them. Scabbers, keep still, Ron hissed, clamping his hand over his chest. The rat was wriggling madly. Ron came to a sudden halt, trying to force Scabbers deeper into his pocket. What's the matter with you, you stupid rat? Stay still. Ouch, he bit me. Ron, be quiet, Hermione whispered urgently. Fudge will be out here in a minute. He won't stay put. Scabbers was plainly terrified. He was writhing with all his might, trying to break free of Ron's grip. What's the matter with him? But Harry had just seen, slinking towards them, his body low to the ground, wide yellow eyes glinting eerily in the darkness, Crookshanks. Whether he could see them or was following the sound of Scabbers' squeaks, Harry couldn't tell. Crookshanks, Hermione moaned. No, go away, Crookshanks, go away. But the cat was getting nearer. Scabbers, no. Too late. The rat had slipped between Ron's clutching fingers, hit the ground, and scampered away. In one bound, Crookshanks sprang after him, and before Harry or Hermione could stop him, Ron had thrown the invisibility cloak off himself and pelted away into the darkness. Ron, Hermione moaned. She and Harry looked at each other, then followed at a sprint. It was impossible to run full out under the cloak. They pulled it off, and it streamed behind them like a banner as they hurtled after Ron. They could hear his feet thundering along ahead and his shouts at Crookshanks. Get away from him! Get away! Scabbers, come here! Uh-oh. You might have to charge that battery, Celine. Ba, ba, ba. Right. There was a loud thud. Gotcha! Get off, you stinking cat! Harry and Hermione almost fell over Ron. They skidded to a stop right in front of him. He was sprawled on the ground, but Scabbers was back in his pocket. He had both hands held tight over the quivering lump. Ron, come on, back under the cloak, Hermione panted. Dumbledore, the minister, they'll be coming back out in a minute. But before they could cover themselves again, before they could even catch their breath, they heard the soft pounding of gigantic paws. Something was bounding towards them out of the dark, an enormous, pale-eyed, jet-black dog. Harry reached for his wand, but too late. The dog had made an enormous leap, and its front paws hit him on the chest. He keeled over backwards in a whirl of hair. He felt its hot breath, saw inch-long teeth. But the force of its leap had carried it too far. It rolled off him. Dazed, feeling as though his ribs were broken, Harry tried to stand up. He could hear it growling as it skidded around for a new attack. Ron was on his feet. As the dog sprang back towards them, he pushed Harry aside. The dog's jaws fastened instead around Ron's outstretched arm. Harry lunged at it and seized a handful of the brute's hair, but it was dragging Ron away as easily as if he were a rag doll. Then, out of nowhere, something hit Harry so hard across the face he was knocked off his feet again. He heard Hermione shriek with pain and fall too. Harry groped for his wand, blinking blood out of his eyes. Loomis, he whispered. The wand light showed him the trunk of a thick tree. They had chased Scabbers into the shadow of the Whomping Willow, and its branches were creaking as though in a high wind, whipping backwards and forwards to stop them going nearer. And there, at the base of the trunk, was the dog, dragging Ron backwards into a large gap in the roots. Ron was fighting furiously, but his head and torso were slipping out of sight. Ron! Harry shouted, trying to follow, but a heavy branch whipped lethally through the air, and he was forced backwards again. All they could see now was one of Ron's legs, which he had hooked around a root in an effort to stop the dog pulling him further underground. Then a horrible crack cut the air like a gunshot. Ron's leg had broken, and next second, his foot had vanished from sight. Harry, we've got to go for help, Hermione cried. She was bleeding too. The willow had cut her across the shoulder. No, that thing's big enough to eat him. We haven't got time. We're never going to get through without help. Another branch whipped down at them, twigs clenched like knuckles. If that dog can get in, we can, Harry panted, darting here and there, trying to find a way through the vicious, swishing branches, but he couldn't get an inch nearer to the tree roots without being in range of the tree's blows. Oh, help, help, Hermione whispered frantically, dancing uncertainly on the spot. Please. Crookshanks darted forwards. He slithered between the battering branches like a snake and placed his front paws upon a knot on the trunk. Abruptly, as though the tree had been turned to marble, it stopped moving. Not a leaf twitched or shook. Crookshanks, Hermione whispered uncertainly. She now grasped Harry's arm painfully hard. How did he know? He's friends with that dog, said Harry grimly. I've seen them together. Come on, and keep your wand out. Well, it didn't die. Oh, your battery died. Oh, uh-oh. They covered the distance of the trunk in seconds, but before they had reached the gap in the roots, Crookshanks had slid into it with a flick of his bottle brush tail. Harry went next. He crawled forwards, head first, and slid down an earthy slope to the bottom of a very low tunnel. Crookshanks was a little way along, his eyes flashing in the light from Harry's wand. Seconds later, Hermione slithered down beside him. Where's Ron? She whispered in a terrified voice. This way, said Harry, setting off, bent back after Crookshanks. Where does this tunnel come out? Hermione asked breathlessly from behind him. I don't know. It's marked on the Marauders map, but Fred and George said no one's ever got into it. It goes off the edge of the map, but it looks like it ends up in Hogsmeade. They moved as fast as they could, bent almost double, Ahead of them, Crookshanks's tail bobbed in and out of view. On and on went the passage. It felt at least as long as the one to Honeyduke's. All Harry could think of was Ron and what the enormous dog might be doing to him. He was drawing breath in sharp, painful gasps, running at a crouch. And then the tunnel began to rise. Moments later, it twisted, and Crookshanks had gone. Instead, Harry could see a patch of dim light through a small opening. He and Hermione paused, gasping for breath, edging forwards. Both raised their wands to see what lay beyond. It was a room, a very disordered, dusty room. Paper was peeling from the walls. There were stains all over the floor. Every piece of furniture was broken, as though somebody had smashed it. The windows were all boarded up. Harry glanced at Hermione, who looked very frightened, but nodded. Harry pulled himself out of the hole, staring around. The room was deserted, but a door to their right stood open, leading to a shadowy hallway. Hermione suddenly grabbed Harry's arm again. Her wide eyes were traveling around the boarded windows. "Harry," she whispered, "I think we're in the Shrieking Shack." Harry looked around. His eyes fell on a wooden chair near them. Large chunks had been torn out of it. One of the legs had been ripped off entirely. "Ghosts don't do that," he said slowly. Or ghosts didn't do that. At that moment, there was a creak overhead. Something had moved upstairs. Both of them looked up at the ceiling. Hermione's grip on Harry's arm was so tight he was losing feeling in his fingers. He raised his eyebrows at her. She nodded again and let go. Quietly as they could, they crept out into the hall and up the crumbling staircase. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, except the floor, where a wide, shiny stripe had been made by something being dragged upstairs. They reached the dark landing. "Knox," they whispered together, and the lights at the end of their wands went out. Only one door was open. As they crept towards it, they heard movement from behind it. A low moan, and then a deep, loud purring. They exchanged a last look, last nod. Wand held tightly before him, Harry kicked the door wide open. On a magnificent four-poster bed with dusty hangings lay Crookshanks, purring loudly at the sight of them. On the floor beside him, clutching his leg, which stuck out at a strange angle, was Ron. Harry and Hermione dashed across to him. "Ron, are you okay?" "Where's the dog?" "Not a dog," Ron moaned. His teeth were gritted with pain. "Harry, it's a trap." "What?" "He's the dog. He's the animagus." Ron was staring over Harry's shoulder. Harry wheeled around. With a snap, the man in the shadows closed the door behind them. A mass of filthy matted hair hung to his elbows. If eyes hadn't been shining out of the deep dark sockets, he might have been a corpse. The waxy skin was stretched so tightly over the bones of his face it looked like a skull. His yellow teeth were bared in a grin. It was Sirius Black. "Expelliarmus," he croaked, pointing Ron's wand at them. Harry and Hermione's wands shot out of their hands, high in the air, and Black caught them. Then he took a step closer. His eyes were fixed on Harry. I thought you'd come and help your friend," he said hoarsely. His voice sounded as though he had long ago lost the habit of using it. "Your father would have done the same for me. Brave of you not to run for a teacher. I'm grateful. It will make everything much easier." The taunt about his father rang in Harry's ears as though Black had bellowed it. A boiling hate erupted in Harry's chest, leaving no place for fear. For the first time in his life, he wanted his wand back in his hand, not to defend himself, but to attack, to kill. Yep. Without knowing what he was doing, he started forwards, but there was a sudden movement on either side of him, and two pairs of hands grabbed him and held him back. "No, Harry," Hermione gasped in a petrified whisper. Ron, however, spoke to Black. "If you want to kill Harry, you'll have to kill us too," he said fiercely, though the effort of standing up had drained him of still more color, and he swayed slightly as he spoke. Something flickered in Black's shadowed eyes. "Lie down," he said quietly to Ron. "You will damage that leg even more." "Did you hear me?" Ron said weakly, though he was still clinging painfully to Harry to stay upright. "You'll have to kill all three of us." "There will only be one murder here tonight," said Black, and his grin widened. "Why's that?" Harry spat, trying to wrench himself free of Ron and Hermione. "Didn't care last time, did you? Didn't mind slaughtering all those muggles to get at Pettigrew. What's the matter? Gone soft in Azkaban?" "Harry," Hermione whimpered, "be quiet." "He killed my mom and dad," Harry roared, and with a huge effort, he broke free of Hermione and Ron's restraint and lunged forwards. He had forgotten about magic. He had forgotten that he was short and skinny and 13, whereas Black was a tall, full-grown man. All Harry knew was that he wanted to hurt Black as badly as he could, and that he didn't care how much he got hurt in return. Perhaps it was the shock of Harry doing something so stupid, but Black didn't raise the wands in time. One of Harry's hands fastened over Black's wasted wrist, forcing the wand tips away. The knuckles of Harry's other hand collided with the side of Black's head, and they fell backwards into the wall. Hermione was screaming. Ron was yelling. There was a blinding flash as the wands in Black's hand set into the air a jet of sparks, which missed Harry's face by inches. Harry felt the shrunken arm under his fingers twisting madly, but he clung on, his other hand punching every part of Black it could find. But Black's free hand had found Harry's throat. "No," he hissed. "I've waited too long." His fingers tightened. Harry choked, his glasses askew. Then he saw Hermione's foot swing out of nowhere. Black let go of Harry with a grunt of pain. Ron had thrown himself onto Black's wand hand, and Harry heard a faint clatter. He fought free of the tangle of bodies and saw his own wand rolling across the floor. He threw himself towards it, but... Crookshanks had joined the fray. Both sets of front claws had sunk themselves deep into Harry's arm. Harry threw him off, but Crookshanks now darted towards Harry's wand. "No, you don't," roared Harry, and he aimed a kick at Crookshanks that made the cat leap aside, spitting. Harry snatched up his wand and turned. "Get out of the way," he shouted at Ron and Hermione. They didn't need telling twice. Hermione, gasping for breath, her lip bleeding, scrambled aside, snatching up her and Ron's wands. Ron crawled to the four-poster and collapsed onto it, panting, his white face now tinged with green, both hands clutching his broken leg. Black was sprawled at the bottom of the wall. His thin chest rose and fell rapidly as he watched Harry walking slowly nearer, his wand pointing straight at Black's heart. "Going to kill me, Harry?" he whispered. Harry stopped right above him, his wand still pointing at Black's chest, looking down at him. A livid bruise was rising around Black's left eye, and his nose was bleeding. "You killed my parents," said Harry, his voice shaking slightly, but his wand hand quite steady. Black stared up at him out of those sunken eyes. "I don't deny it," he said very quietly. "But if you knew the whole story—" "The whole story?" Harry repeated, a furious pounding in his ears. "You sold them to Voldemort. That's all I need to know." "You've got to listen to me," Black said, and there was a note of urgency in his voice. "You'll regret it if you don't. You don't understand." "I understand a lot better than you think," said Harry, and his voice shook more than ever. "You never heard her, did you? My mom, trying to stop Voldemort killing me. And you did that. You did it." Before either of them could say another word, something ginger streaked past Harry. Crookshanks leapt onto Black's chest and settled himself there, right over Black's heart. Black blinked and looked down at the cat. "Get off," he muttered, trying to push Crookshanks off him. But Crookshanks sank his claws into Black's robes and wouldn't shift. He turned his ugly, squashed face to Harry and looked up at him with those great yellow eyes. To his right, Hermione gave a dry sob. Harry stared down at Black and Crookshanks, his grip tightening on the wand. So what if he had to kill the cat too? It was in league with Black. If it was prepared to die, trying to protect Black, that wasn't Harry's business. If Black wanted to save it, that only proved he cared more for Crookshanks than Harry's parents. Harry raised the wand. Now was the moment to do it. Now was the moment to avenge his mother and father. He was going to kill Black. He had to kill Black. This was his chance. The seconds lengthened, and still Harry stood frozen there, wand poised, Black staring up at him. Crookshanks on his chest. Ron's ragged breathing came from near the bed. Hermione was quite silent. And then came a new sound. Muffled footsteps were echoing up through the floor. Someone was moving downstairs. "We're up here," Hermione screamed suddenly. "We're up here! Sirius Black! Quick!" Black made a startled movement that almost dislodged Crookshanks. Harry gripped his wand convulsively. "Do it now," said a voice in his head. But the footsteps were thundering up the stairs, and Harry still hadn't done it. The door of the room burst open in a shower of red sparks, and Harry wheeled around as Professor Lupin came hurtling into the room, his face bloodless, his wand raised and ready. His eyes flickered over Ron, lying on the floor, over Hermione, cowering next to the door, to Harry, standing there with his wand covering Black, and then to Black himself, crumpled and bleeding at Harry's feet. Expelliarmus, Lupin shouted. Harry's wand flew once more out of his hand. So did the two Hermione was holding. Lupin caught them all deftly, then moved into the room, staring at Black, who still had Crookshanks lying protectively across his chest. Harry stood there, feeling suddenly empty. He hadn't done it. His nerve had failed him. Black was going to be handed back to the Dementors. Then Lupin spoke in an odd voice, a voice that shook with some suppressed emotion. Where is he, Sirius? Harry looked quickly at Lupin. He didn't understand what Lupin meant. Who was Lupin talking about? He turned to look at Black again. Black's face was quite expressionless. For a few seconds, he didn't move at all. Then, very slowly, he raised his empty hand and pointed straight at Ron. Mystified, Harry glanced around at Ron, who looked bewildered. But then, Lupin muttered, staring at Black so intently it seemed he was trying to read his mind. Why hasn't he shown himself before now? Unless... Lupin's eyes suddenly widened as though he was seeing something beyond Black, something none of the rest could see. Unless he was the one. Unless you switched without telling me. Very slowly, his sunken gaze never leaving Lupin's face, Black nodded. Professor Lupin, Harry interrupted loudly. What's going on? But he never finished the question because what he saw made his voice die in his throat. Lupin was lowering his wand. Next moment, he had walked to Black's side, seized his hand, pulled him to his feet so that Crookshanks fell to the floor, and embraced Black like a brother. Harry felt as though the bottom had dropped out of his stomach. I don't believe it, Hermione screamed. Lupin let go of Black and turned to her. She had raised herself off the floor and was pointing at Lupin, wild-eyed. You... Hermione. You and him. Hermione, calm down. I didn't tell anyone, Hermione shrieked. I've been covering up for you. Hermione, listen to me, please, Lupin shouted. I can explain. Harry could feel himself shaking, not with fear, but with a fresh wave of fury. I trusted you, he shouted at Lupin, his voice wavering out of control, and all the time you've been his friend. You're wrong, said Lupin. I haven't been Sirius's friend for 12 years, but I am now. Let me explain. No, Hermione screamed. Harry, don't trust him. He's been helping Black get into the castle. He wants you dead too. He's a werewolf. There was a ringing silence. Everyone's eyes were now on Lupin, who looked remarkably calm, though rather pale. Not at all up to your usual standard, Hermione, he said. Only 1 out of 3, I'm afraid. I have not been helping Sirius get into the castle, and I certainly don't want Harry dead. An odd shiver passed over his face. But I won't deny that I am a werewolf. Ron made a valiant effort to get up again, but fell back with a whimper of pain. Lupin made towards him, looking concerned, but Ron gasped, Get away from me, werewolf! Lupin stopped dead. Then, with an obvious effort, he turned to Hermione and said, How long have you known? Ages, Hermione whispered. Since I did Professor Snape's essay. He'll be delighted, said Lupin coolly. He set that essay hoping somebody would realize what my symptoms meant. Did you check the lunar chart and realize that I was always ill at the full moon? Or did you realize that the Bogart changed into the moon when it saw me? Both, Hermione said quietly. Lupin forced a laugh. You're the cleverest witch of your age I've ever met, Hermione. I'm not, Hermione whispered. If I'd been a bit cleverer, I'd have told everyone what you are. But they already know, said Lupin. At least the staff do. Dumbledore hired you when he knew you were a werewolf? Ron gasped. Is he mad? Some of the staff thought so, said Lupin. He had to work very hard to convince certain teachers that I'm trustworthy. And he was wrong, Harry yelled. You've been helping him all the time. He was pointing at Black, who had crossed to the 4-poster bed and sunk onto it, his face hidden in one shaking hand. Crookshanks leapt up beside him and stepped onto his lap, purring. Ron edged away from both of them, dragging his leg. I have not been helping Sirius, said Lupin. If you'll give me a chance, I'll explain. Look. He separated Harry, Ron, and Hermione's wands and threw each back to its owner. Harry caught his, stunned. There, said Lupin, sticking his own wand back into his belt. You're armed, we're not. Now will you listen? Harry didn't know what to think. Was it a trick? If you haven't been helping him, he said, with a furious glance at Black, how did you know he was here? The map, said Lupin. The Marauder's map. I was in my office examining it. You know how to work it? Harry said suspiciously. Of course I know how to work it, said Lupin, waving his hand impatiently. I helped write it. I'm Moony. That was my friend's nickname for me at school. You wrote? The important thing is, I was watching it carefully this evening because I had an idea that you, Ron, and Hermione might try and sneak out of the castle to visit Hagrid before his hippogriff was executed. And I was right, wasn't I? He had started to pace up and down, looking at them. Little patches of dust rose at his feet. You might have been wearing your father's old cloak, Harry. How do you know about the cloak? The number of times I saw James disappearing under it, said Lupin, waving an impatient hand again. The point is, even if you're wearing an invisibility cloak, you show up on the Marauder's map. I watched you cross the grounds and enter Hagrid's hut. 20 minutes later, you left Hagrid and set off back towards the castle, but you are now accompanied by somebody else. What? Said Harry. No, we weren't. I couldn't believe my eyes, said Lupin, still pacing and ignoring Harry's interruption. I thought the map must be malfunctioning. How could he be with you? No one was with us, said Harry. And then I saw another dot, moving fast towards you, labeled Sirius Black. I saw him collide with you. I watched as he pulled 2 of you to the Whomping Willow. One of us, Ron said angrily. No, Ron, said Lupin. 2 of you. He had stopped his pacing, his eyes moving over Ron. Do you think I could have a look at the rat? He said evenly. What? Said Ron. What's Scabbers got to do with it? Everything, said Lupin. Could I see him, please? Ron hesitated, then put a hand inside his robes. Scabbers emerged, thrashing desperately. Ron had to seize his long, bald tail to stop him escaping. Crookshanks stood up on Black's lap and made a soft hissing noise. Lupin moved closer to Ron. He seemed to be holding his breath as he gazed intently at Scabbers. What? Ron said again, holding Scabbers close to him, looking scared. What's my rat got to do with anything? That's not a rat, croaked Sirius Black suddenly. What do you mean? Of course he's a rat. No, he's not, said Lupin quietly. He's a wizard. An animagus, said Black, by the name of Peter Pettigrew. And that's the end of chapter 17. I know that was kind of a short one. Hi, Dakota. What do you guys think? Should we do one more right now? That was kind of a cliffhanger. This next one's not very long. So I think we'll do chapter 18 right now too, if you guys are able to stick around. Okay. It's only a few pages. So let's do chapter 18 now too. I'll change the title of this video when we're finished. All right. Chapter 18. Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs. It took a few seconds for the absurdity of this statement to sink in. Then Ron voiced what Harry was thinking. You're both mental. Ridiculous, said Hermione faintly. Peter Pettigrew's dead, said Harry. He killed him 12 years ago. He pointed at Black, whose face twitched convulsively. I meant to, he growled, his yellow teeth bared. But little Peter got the better of me. Not this time, though. And Crookshanks was thrown to the floor as Black lunged at Scabbers. Ron yelled with pain as Black's weight fell on his broken leg. Sirius, no. It's only a few pages. Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 pages. So not long. Sirius, no, Lupin yelled, launching himself forwards and dragging Black away from Ron again. And remember, you don't have to stay for this part 2, right? If you want to come back and listen to chapter 18 another time, that's fine too. Launching himself forwards and dragging Black away from Ron again. Wait, you can't do it just like that. They need to understand. We've got to explain. We can explain afterwards, snarled Black, trying to throw Lupin off, one hand still clawing the air as it tried to reach Scabbers, who was squealing like a piglet, scratching Ron's face and neck as he tried to escape. They've got a right to know everything, Lupin panted, still trying to restrain Black. Ron's kept him as a pet. There are parts of it even I don't understand. And Harry, you owe Harry the truth, Sirius. Black stopped, struggling, though his hollowed eyes were still fixed on Scabbers, who was clamped tightly under Ron's bitten, scratched, and bleeding hands. All right then, Black said, without taking his eyes off the rat. Tell them whatever you like, but make it quick, Remus. I want to commit the murder I was imprisoned for. You're nutters, both of you, said Ron shakily, looking round at Harry and Hermione for support. I've had enough of this. I'm off. He tried to heave himself up on his good leg, but Lupin raised his wand again, pointing it at Scabbers. You're going to hear me out, Ron, he said quietly. Just keep a tight hold on Peter while you listen. He's not Peter, he's Scabbers, Ron yelled, trying to force the rat back into his front pocket, but Scabbers was fighting too hard. Ron swayed and overbalanced, and Harry caught him and pushed him back down to the bed. Then, ignoring Black, Harry turned to Lupin. There were witnesses who saw Pettigrew die, he said, a whole street full of them. They didn't see what they thought they saw, said Black savagely, still watching Scabbers struggling in Ron's hands. Everyone thought Sirius killed Peter, said Lupin, nodding. I believed it myself, until I saw the map tonight, because the Marauder's map never lies. Peter's alive. Ron's holding him, Harry. Harry looked down at Ron, and as their eyes met, they agreed silently. Black and Lupin were both out of their minds. Their story made no sense whatsoever. How could Scabbers be Peter Pettigrew? Azkaban must have unhinged Black after all. But why was Lupin playing along with him? Then Hermione spoke in a trembling, would-be calm sort of voice, as though trying to will Professor Lupin to talk sensibly. But Professor Lupin, Scabbers can't be Pettigrew. It just can't be true. You know it can't. Why can't it be true? Lupin said calmly, as though they were in class and Hermione had simply spotted a problem in an experiment with Grindylows. Because people would know if Peter Pettigrew had been an animagus. We did animagi in class with Professor McGonagall, and I looked them up when I did my homework. The Ministry keeps tabs on witches and wizards who can become animals. There's a register showing what animal they become, and their markings and things. And I went and looked Professor McGonagall up on the register, and there have only been 7 animagi this century, and Pettigrew's name wasn't on the list. Harry barely had time to marvel inwardly at the effort Hermione put into her homework when Lupin started to laugh. Right again, Hermione, he said, but the Ministry never knew that there used to be 3 unregistered animagi running around Hogwarts. If you're going to tell them the story, get a move on, Remus, snarled Black, who was still watching Scabbers' every desperate move. I've waited 12 years. I'm not going to wait much longer. All right, but you'll need to help me, Sirius, said Lupin. I only know how it began. Lupin broke off. There had been a loud creak behind him. The bedroom door had opened of its own accord. All 5 of them stared at it. Then Lupin strode towards it and looked out into the landing. No one there. This place is haunted, said Ron. It's not, said Lupin, still looking at the door in a puzzled way. The Shrieking Shack was never haunted. The screams and howls the villagers used to hear were made by me. He pushed his graying hair out of his eyes, thought for a moment, then said, That's where all of this starts, with my becoming a werewolf. None of this could have happened if I hadn't been bitten, if I hadn't been so foolhardy. He looked sober and tired. Ron started to interrupt, but Hermione said, Shh. She was watching Lupin very intently. I was a very small boy when I received the bite. My parents tried everything, but in those days there was no cure. The potion that Professor Snape has been making for me is a very recent discovery. It makes me safe, you see. As long as I take it in the week preceding the full moon, I keep my mind when I transform. I am able to curl up in my office, a harmless wolf, and wait for the moon to wane again. Before the wolfsbane potion was discovered, however, I became a fully fledged monster once a month. It seemed impossible that I would be able to come to Hogwarts. Other parents weren't likely to want their children exposed to me. But then Dumbledore became headmaster, and he was sympathetic. He said that, as long as we took certain precautions, there was no reason I shouldn't come to school. Lupin sighed and looked directly at Harry. I told you, months ago, that the Whomping Willow was planted the year I came to Hogwarts. The truth is, it was planted because I had come to Hogwarts. This house, Lupin looked miserably around the room, the tunnel that leads to it, they were built for my use. Once a month, I was smuggled out of the castle into this place to transform. The tree was placed at the tunnel mouth to stop anyone coming across me while I was dangerous. Harry couldn't see where this story was going, but he was listening raptly all the same. The only sound apart from Lupin's voice was Scabbers' frightened squeaking. My transformations in those days were terrible. It is very painful to turn into a werewolf. I was separated from humans to bite, so I bit and scratched myself instead. The villagers heard the noise and the screaming and thought they were hearing particularly violent spirits. Dumbledore encouraged the rumor. Even now, when the house has been silent for years, the villagers don't dare approach it. But apart from my transformations, I was happier than I had ever been in my life. For the first time ever, I had friends. 3 great friends. Sirius Black, Peter Pettigrew, and, of course, your father, Harry, James Potter. Now, my 3 friends could hardly fail to notice that I disappeared once a month. I made up all sorts of stories. I told them my mother was ill and that I had to go home to see her. I was terrified they would desert me the moment they found out what I was. But of course, they, like you, Hermione, worked out the truth. And they didn't desert me at all. Instead, they did something for me that would make my transformations not only bearable, but the best times of my life. They became Animagi. Animagi? My dad, too? Said Harry, astounded. Yes, indeed, said Lupin. It took them the best part of 3 years to work out how to do it. Your father and Sirius here were the cleverest students in the school, and lucky they were because the Animagus transformation can go horribly wrong. One reason the Ministry keeps a close watch on those attempting to do it. Peter needed all the help he could get from James and Sirius. Finally, in our 5th year, they managed it. They could each turn into a different animal at will. But how did that help you? Said Hermione, sounding puzzled. They couldn't keep me company as humans, so they kept me company as animals, said Lupin. A werewolf is only a danger to people. They snuck out of the castle every month under James's invisibility cloak. They transformed. Peter, as the smallest, could slip beneath the willow's attacking branches and touch the knot that freezes it. They would then slip down the tunnel and join me. Under their influence, I became less dangerous. My body was still wolfish, but my mind seemed to become less so while I was with them. Hurry up, Remus, snarled Black, who was still watching Scabbers with a horrible sort of hunger in his face. I'm getting there, Sirius. I'm getting there. Well, highly exciting possibilities were open to us now we could all transform. Soon we were leaving the Shrieking Shack and roaming the school grounds and the village by night. Sirius and James transformed into such large animals they were able to keep a werewolf in check. I doubt whether any Hogwarts students ever found out more about the Hogwarts grounds and Hogsmeade than we did. And that's how we came to write the Marauders map and sign it with our nicknames. Sirius is Padfoot, Peter is Wormtail, James was Prongs. What sort of animal? Harry began, but Hermione cut across him. That was still really dangerous, running around in the dark with a werewolf. What if you'd given the others the slip and bitten somebody? A thought that still haunts me, said Lupin heavily. And there were near misses, many of them. We laughed about them afterwards. We were young, thoughtless, carried away with our own cleverness. I sometimes felt guilty about betraying Dumbledore's trust, of course. He had admitted me to Hogwarts when no other headmaster would have done so, and he had no idea I was breaking the rules he had set down for my own and others' safety. He never knew I had led 3 fellow students into becoming Animagi illegally, but I always managed to forget my guilty feelings every time we sat down to plan our next month's adventure, and I haven't changed. Lupin's face had hardened, and there was self-disgust in his voice. All this year I've been battling with myself, wondering whether I should tell Dumbledore that Sirius was an Animagus, but I didn't do it. Why? Because I was too cowardly. It would have meant admitting that I'd betrayed his trust while I was at school, admitting that I led others along with me, and Dumbledore's trust has meant everything to me. He let me into Hogwarts as a boy, and he gave me a job when I had been shunned all my adult life, unable to find paid work because of what I am. And so I convinced myself that Sirius was getting into the school using dark arts he learned from Voldemort, that being an Animagus had nothing to do with it. So, in a way, Snape's been right about me all along. Snape? Said Black harshly, taking his eyes off Scabbers for the first time in minutes and looking at Lupin. What's Snape got to do with it? He's here, Sirius, said Lupin heavily. He's teaching here as well. He looked up at Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Professor Snape was at school with us. He fought very hard against my appointment to the Defense Against the Dark Arts job. He has been telling Dumbledore all year that I am not to be trusted. He has his reasons. You see, Sirius here played a trick on him, which nearly killed him. A trick which involved me. Black made a derisive noise. Served him right, he sneered, sneaking around, trying to find out what we were up to, hoping he could get us expelled. Severus was very interested in where I went every month, Lupin told Harry, Ron, and Hermione. We were in the same year, and we didn't like each other very much. He especially disliked James, jealous, I think, of James's talent on the Quidditch pitch. Anyway, Snape had seen me crossing the grounds with Madame Pomfrey one evening as she led me towards the Whomping Willow to transform. Sirius thought it would be amusing to tell Snape all he had to do was prod the knot on the tree trunk with a long stick, and he'd be able to get in after me. Oh, Miley, you're gonna have. I don't want to hang out for too long here. So, Professor Lupin is explaining kind of background to Ron, Harry, and Hermione. Okay, so you can go back and listen, but that's all I'm going to say on that right now. Well, of course, Snape tried it. If he got as far as this house, he would have met a fully grown werewolf. But your father, who'd heard what Sirius had done, went after Snape and pulled him back at great risk to his life. Snape glimpsed me, though, at the end of the tunnel. He was forbidden to tell anybody by Dumbledore. But from that time on, he knew what I was. So that's why Snape doesn't like you, said Harry slowly. Because he thought you were in on the joke? That's right, sneered a cold voice from the wall behind Lupin. Severus Snape was pulling off the invisibility cloak, his wand pointing directly at Lupin. Ooh, so Snape was there in the room. Okay, that's the end of chapter 18. So you got 2 chapters today, and the rest will be going up this week, right? We've got chapter 19, 20, 21, 22. So Friday will be the last day of our read alouds, okay? And I'm not going to be starting a new book for the last 2 weeks of June. So, I told you it was a short one. So keep your eyes out for those ones coming this week, those last 4 chapters. They won't be live videos. They will be just posted to the channel. Okay? All right, you guys, have a great rest of your Monday, and I will see some of you on Wednesday. I'll be back at school tomorrow. All right, I know, Reed. You guys can always go on and read book 4, right? You'll be ready to read book 4 after we finish this one. All right, you guys, have a great Monday. Bye.